Yeah, so let's get into kind of what's next for the Big 12 and Baylor. So your ideal situation is the Big 12 remains at 8. They all kind of stick together and they just add teams. Is that kind of where you're thinking works the best?
Here's
currently?
the thing, man. I'm trying to track all these tea leaves. I know there was the big talk about Iowa State and Kansas in the Big 10. But the Big 10 Pac-12 thing, if there's any legs to that changes everything, because it wouldn't be both conferences absorbing each other. It would be like the top, based on what I've read. Fox now sees what ESPN's doing. They're like, oh, shoot, we better get what we can get while we can get it before they soak everything up. So the idea that I've seen floated out there would be like the top 6 brands. So like USC, UCLA, Oregon, Cal, and 2 others would join the Big 10. There's even been talk about like just the conferences together scheduling each other, but I don't know. That's possible. Maybe there's a 20-team Super League or something.
Pac-12 and Big 8. Or Big
yeah,
12.
That would be like 26 teams. So I don't know that they could do that. And that would be kind of weird geography-wise. That's a big stretch going all of a sudden from like Southern Cal to like Wisconsin. That's kind of giant. But yeah, the idea is either they would take the 6 brands. So let's say in that scenario that's what were to happen. Well, that'd be great news for the Big 12, because all of a sudden the Arizona schools are available. Utah's available. BYU. Colorado maybe. So there's your Big 12 right there. So that would be great. Now, if the 2 conferences in totality just cross-schedule each other, well, then the Big 12's still screwed in this scenario, and you wouldn't need to go and expand if you were the Pac-12 or the Big 10, because you'd have this conference agreement. So that one wouldn't be as beneficial in my mind. So that's a piece that's probably not going to fall until the OU Texas thing is done. Now, that might be done by Thursday, as we're seeing right now. So then I think you got to kind of just see what happens next. And if that's the next move, then obviously that would have massive repercussions one way or the other. So I think you have to be proactive, but you can't be almost too proactive, because you might hurry up a decision and miss out on a way better opportunity if you had just remained a little more patient. So, man, I don't know. There's too many moving parts, because if it was simply just Texas and Oklahoma are gone, then I think I would say, yeah, all 8 stick together, get your buyout, go at Cincinnati and UCF and
try to steal Arizona.
Try to steal Arizona's schools and do something like that. I'm with you on the Power 5 thing. I just don't think there's any Power 5 teams that are available unless a Big 10, Pac-12 type of situation were to happen. Because otherwise, if you're an ACC, a Pac-12, a Big 10, and obviously the SEC, none of those schools are leaving their conferences. They have no reason to leave those conferences, because those conferences are sturdy. The ACC's contract still has years on it. SEC and Big 10 are never going to die. And the Pac-12 is actually in a stronger spot than the Big 12 now. So, and they have actually 12 teams. So I don't know why, if you were Arizona or Arizona State or Colorado, you'd be in any rush to leave a sure thing with a brand new commissioner and then go join this conference that's basically begging people. So
I think it's the domino that you mentioned that has to fall. It's the Oregon, USC. They need the Pac-12's big brands to leave, because when that happens, then it becomes a totally different conversation. Then you're just trying to find out who's going to be the 4th conference, because then the Big 12 actually has a shot at taking Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado.
But if not, then you're looking at, okay, and I don't know the exact term. I don't know how long they have to wait before splitting up to have that money. You know what I'm saying? So if they have to stick together for a year, or if, hey, you just play through the next couple years, they pay the buyout, and then you can go your separate way.
It's through the contract. So it's through
24-25.
Yeah.
So that's right. I did read that the other day. So man, that makes things really complicated. And you already hear that, the Texas Tech mentioned at Pac-12 Media Days and the non-denial about whether or not there's been any interest or talks there. So, there'd be one team, and, they're already at 8 as it is. They can't go below 4, but that's only 4 more teams, Bolton. So, yeah, I'm preaching patience on this, because I don't know what the next big domino to fall is going to be. And I think we'd be all naive to think that there's not going to be more dominoes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think, ideally, though, Baylor somehow, along with TCU, finds themselves in the ACC. I think that is the most ideal situation. Now, is it super likely? Probably not, but I do think it's possible. I see a path to it. And I think that would be the most ideal. I think the fit is much better in the ACC than it would be in the Pac-12. And so that's what I would hope happens for Baylor. But yeah, there's so many dominoes that could still fall. I mean, there's going to be a question of, do these super conferences, does it end up being the 32 teams? Is it 16 teams? Is it 64 teams? If it's 32, Baylor's toast. They're not going to be in that 32. But 64, I think they could be in that 64, be in the mix for being one of those 64 teams to make a super conference.
Yeah, well, it's definitely not going to be 32 because there's just no room for everybody. I mean, you would have to contract all the other conferences, and it would have to be like, I mean, there was that rumor the other day, which I think has already been shot down basically, but Ohio State and Michigan have talked to the SEC about, and I saw that on Saturday or something, and I haven't seen it since. And I think somebody even just shot holes through it. I don't know. I mean, I don't believe anything 100% now. I mean, if they were talking to him, I wouldn't be surprised. But that'd be stupid on the part of any Big Ten school like Ohio State to leave your sturdy position to just go join and be one of a dozen other schools that are just like you. So, yeah. 32 would be too small. There's just too many teams. I mean, there's 14 in the SEC alone. There's, 14 in the Big Ten. Well, hey, there's still a bunch of good schools in the ACC, and there's some good schools in the Pac-12, and there's still some potential contenders in the Big 12. So you'd be leaving a lot of people out of the mix potentially. I just don't see it being that small of a field.
I don't either, but it's just something that becomes more likely because of this situation that's happened. I do think 64 will end up being the number, but I'm just curious, like Notre Dame, for instance, I think they're going to be forced to join the ACC.
I don't think you can force Notre Dame to do anything.
You can't, but I think they're going to have to. I mean, or else they're going to get left out. Why keep them in? Why keep them in if they're not going to join a conference? Like they would be the only oddball.
What have they been doing this entire time, basically?
I know, but right now there's so many teams that are still in quote unquote contention. I think if you get rid of, you trim that fat a little bit down to 64, what are you going to do? 64 teams and then Notre Dame?
Why does it? I mean, yeah. Because, I mean, it's not like you're holding March Madness. You don't need 64 teams exactly for a tournament. I mean, it's still going to be, if anything, an expanded playoff, but that's still going to be pretty much, 8 teams? So,
but do you think the expanded playoff could end up being just those 64 teams?
Eventually, not right now. So I don't know what the rush would be for Notre Dame because Notre Dame's good regardless. They don't have to join a conference. They are an independent, and no one really questions it. And I know people are like, well, they should. But, I mean, if you're Notre Dame, are you sacrificing that independence that you have to be under the mercy of a conference just like everyone else? You've shown you're willing to do it to an extent, but to actually fully do that and have to play by the rules just like Louisville or just like Michigan State, I don't think they'd want to do that. I think there's something unique to being an independent and being as big of, I mean, it's Notre Dame. Yeah. I think it's overrated as hell, honestly, because we're talking about history from the 50s, but it's still Notre Dame. It's still that brand, and so, they have the ability, but I know what you're saying. I just don't think that they have to be in a rush or feel like they're being forced to do anything, because at the end of the day, no matter if they're independent or they're in a conference, they're still going to get consiederation for whatever championship tournament there is.
Yeah, they're just a big fish. They're
a big domino. There, because like you said, if they were to decide, hey, let's join the ACC. Well, then the ACC wants one more, and they want to round out, and that has a domino effect. So yeah, I mean they are a wild card in this, but I just don't see what their purpose. I don't see why that would be the best move for Notre Dame, is all I'm saying. I think they're good where they are right now. But, yeah, I mean, that's certainly a possibility. So, I don't know, man. It's just all wild. It's wild how much just in 1 week. I mean, we were at Big 12 Media Days a week ago. Everything was cool, fine. Leaving the AT&T Stadium parking lot was like, wow, that was really chill. Seems like the Big 12's in a good place, and man, just days later, this pops.
Yeah, and it's going to be a very, very long process. I think I don't even know if it can be long, but I just think it's going to take a lot of conversations, and hopefully Baylor was somewhat prepared for this.
Oh, I don't think so.
No, yeah, and that's the problem, is that I don't think anyone in the Big 12 was. So now you have to just kind of scramble, and that's where everyone becomes a very scary situation, because everyone's starting to look out for themselves. And there's going to be a lot of conversations, I think, over the next month or so to try to figure out what the next move is. I would say the one move that I just simply hope doesn't happen is that Baylor joins the American or something along those lines. And I just think that's would be such a terrible move until you know exactly what's going to happen. So stay pat unless a Power 5 offer comes from like an ACC or a Pac-12, and then go from there is kind of what I would think is going to happen, and kind of where I think Baylor should go.
Yeah, well, the Pac-12 commish said that the whole like academic standing thing is not going to be a hindrance on potential expansion. So that was good news for Tech, because I mean, I'm not even knocking them. I mean, I could call them a diploma mill, which they are, but I mean that was a concern as far as acceptance into the Big Ten that started getting brought up a lot. Well, no, Iowa State's an AAU school, and so they would fit right in. But based on the Big Ten tea leaves I was reading, they don't want Kansas and Iowa State. They don't want those teams. And I think it would be, based on what I was reading, a very long shot that those teams would make it into the Big Ten. I think the Pac-12 merger combination thing is probably of far more interest to them, a much bigger swath of the country, more intriguing and sexy programs in Oregon and USC than in Kansas and Iowa State. I mean, and be honest with you, and I'm not sitting here like Baylor's a juggernaut by any means. I know their problems that they have, and I know the attractive parts of Baylor that they have as well. But, I had somebody say, like, well, what do you think of Iowa State? I just don't see why you'd be interested, honestly, because Matt Campbell suddenly has a good football team. Well, that happens everywhere at some point or another. Kansas State? Like, what's their pull?
They're in trouble, yeah.
I think they'd be like the least interesting of everybody remaining in the Big 12.
I think Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State, and maybe Texas Tech are probably the four that I think are the top dogs. But then it's also like geographics-wise, I mean, Kansas is kind of in Big Ten country a little bit, and they have the good basketball program, which makes that slightly appealing.
Right.
They could make the Big Ten, honestly, the best basketball conference in the country. They've already been in the mix, but Kansas could push them to another level. I think those four, though, are the top brands when you're talking college football and success at other sports as well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go in their favor, though, by any means.
No, not at all. So, yeah, man, it's crazy what all is going on. I mean, we could talk for another hour on it easily. Yeah. I mean, just all those different scenarios. So as of right now, Big 12 is down to 8 schools, basically, and they're sticking together as of right now. And the Pac-12 is open for business, and the Big Ten seems open for business, although there's a lot of rush to judgments, too. There's a lot of people like, well, then now the Big Ten doesn't have to do anything. They got buku money right now as is. And, the thing that people don't think about, like, oh, go add Iowa State and Kansas and dilute what you're making. They're not bringing in any extra money.
And it keeps them from getting Oregon, USC. It keeps them from being major players in those situations, which I don't think they want to do. That's the thing. The ACC can't get Oregon. It's just too far. They can't get those schools. So I think the Big Ten's probably the team that I would bet they're going to stay pat until they figure out the Pac-12 situation. But the other conference, ACC, is the one that I think could be potentially looking to make moves, because it's all about keeping up with the Joneses. And honestly, if they think the Big Ten has a shot at getting Oregon and USC, you got to think the ACC is probably thinking, okay, how can we make our conference stronger and make sure that we're keeping up numbers-wise and just with our conference's prestige?
Yeah, so I think as far as fits go, Baylor in the ACC would be the best one. I mean, but I don't have like a long spiel on why it would make sense. It just, geographically, some of the similar schools, basketball conference, I think that would be their best bet, but I don't know that the ACC is looking around right now. I think they're like a lot of other people going, okay, we've got our contract set for a few more years. We're not in any rush. We'll just kind of see how this plays out. So I think where to look now is obviously Oklahoma and Texas and the fight with the Big 12 that's forthcoming. That's what to pay attention to. And obviously the fragile nature of the Big 12 and whether or not these 8 schools are going to be able to actually stick together long enough to be able to get a really big payday that with the departure of OU and Texas, quite frankly, they're going to need that money. All of those schools will need that $15 to $18 million that's sitting out there waiting on them right now. So right now it's basically a waiting game, and it's just a bunch of stuff like the last 45 minutes of what we're talking about. I mean, that's what everybody in college sports is doing right now, is figuring out, including the administrators. I mean, they're figuring out all this stuff that's going on. So, the Big 12, safe to say, was completely blindsided, Baylor included, had no idea this was coming. I wonder about the future of Bob Bowlesby, but OU and Texas are gone, barring some surprise vote by the SEC schools, which is not going to happen because they don't deviate from Greg Sankey. So, OU and Texas last year in the Big 12. Looks like it'll be coming up this season. But we got plenty more to talk about on the boards and on Sikkim 365 Radio about all this, as we've been doing the last few days.